Well, welcome back to the channel. This is my short review of the 2020 BMW S1000 XR. I said in a previous video that I already own a S1000 XR. I've got a 2018 model. That's just tipped over 24,000 miles now. 2 years old. And this new model, the 2020 XR, came out earlier on this year, but it's only just arriving in showrooms because obviously because of lockdown the showrooms have been shut. So one thing to bear in mind, I'm not a professional motorbike reviewer, not a motorcycle journalist. My expertise sort of lies in the riding and the driving and the advanced stuff. But I thought it'd be interesting to do a little review video, share my thoughts, particularly seeing as this bike is pretty much brand new in the showrooms. Williams Motorrad in Manchester very kindly lent me this bike for a few hours while mine's in for a service. I think I'm the first customer to ride it. So we've done 150 miles. So let's go and have a park up, I'll walk you around the bike, let you have a look around it, and then we'll take it for a ride and I'll share my riding impressions with you. So let's have a look around the bike to start with, and then we'll take it for a ride and I'll give you my riding impressions. I suppose on the face of it, it looks very similar to the previous S1000 XR. Mine's in the HP colours. This is the sort of silvery grey colour that they do. The other colour that's out for launch is sort of red and black colour. I quite like this colour. It's not to everybody's taste, I know, but I quite like it. Size-wise, it's a very similar size to the previous S1000 XR. The engine, as with the previous model, is lifted from the S1000 RR. But this doesn't have the shift cam technology that's in the RR. It's in a state of tune that gives, I think, 162 brake horsepower, and I'll stand to be corrected, but I think it's 118 newton meters of torque. They've made some changes to the internals of the engine, internals of the gearbox, so I know that 5th and 6th gear are higher on this bike than they are on the previous model S1000 XR. BMW say that's to improve fuel economy. I don't think anybody buys these bikes with a view to fuel economy, but certainly in the short time I've been riding it, I've noticed that it's a little less buzzy at the top end, at sort of higher speeds in top gear. The front of the bike, if we switch it on, it's got these new LED headlights and LED daytime running lights that look quite good. On my bike there's a sort of vertical strip LED running light right in the very middle underneath the screen. On this bike that's a bit of an air intake, and they've now put the LED running lights underneath the headlights. I suppose while we've got the ignition on, you can see that the other most obvious change to the bike is they fitted it with BMW's colour TFT screen, which is pretty good actually, to be honest. Loads of information on there. And it can link to your phone apparently. You can get sort of sat-nav directions up from your phone on there. I haven't tried it, I've not got the bike for long enough to try that kind of stuff. One thing I absolutely love, and I know one or two other people have pointed it out on this bike, is this lever here for adjusting the screen. One click for up and one click for down, and you can do that on the move. That is significantly better than my bike, where you just have to do it really when you're stationary or when you're off the bike. Size wise, it feels a little bit taller when you put your leg over it, but then when you're on it, it feels like your legs are just a little bit further up than they were on the other bike. So a little bit of a mix in comparison with the old bike. This seat is in my view not particularly comfortable. It's a little bit harder than the old seat. Now I believe BMW do a softer seat option. That may well be a box worth ticking if I end up getting one of these. So the bike comes in two specs. This is the TE spec. There's a standard spec below this, and then there's a TE spec. TE comes with a number of little additions, so the heated grips, it's got cruise control, and it's got the quick shifter, BMW's Gear Shift Assist Pro, which I have on my current bike. As soon as you're on the move, obviously you need the clutch to set off and to come to a stop. Other than that, once you're on the move, you can just tap the gears up and down without touching the clutch. It's great on my bike. A little bit clunky on this one, if I'm being honest. I think that's down to it being a brand new bike and not properly running yet. So I'll forgive it that. There's one or two other things I need to forgive this bike for being brand new. You notice the exhaust is quite a bit smaller than the exhaust on the previous model. but at the same time it's quite a bit quieter as well. So I understand this is Euro 5 compliant, so there's a lot more gubbins in the exhaust under here to keep the emissions as low as possible. With that comes a bit of a subdued engine note, so whereas the previous model in dynamic pop and bang nicely when you rolled off the gas, this is a little bit more, shall we say, mature, a little bit more grown up. Maybe not as aggressive on the exhaust notes. It certainly sounds a bit quieter, and I had a ride up here without the earplugs in just to see if I could hear the distance, and it does sound significantly quieter even in dynamic engine mode. Suspension on this model in the TE spec, it's all adjustable electronically, automatically adjustable as well, so it'll make a judgment itself off the weight that's on the bike, work out whether there's a pillion on and adjust the preload and the damper settings automatically, so that's nice and easy if you want somebody to just jump on. You don't have to faff about with it. Chain drive, of course, and I mentioned on the previous model that I didn't think BMW fitted a particularly good quality chain and sprocket to it. This looks pretty much like the one that was originally fitted to mine, so I'd expect under normal riding to get about 10 or 12,000 miles before you need to change that. Brakes, Brembos on the previous model XR. On this, BMW branded calipers on the front. I've noticed that the brakes are really keen, really good on the front end, not very well running on the back end yet. BMW branded caliper on the back as well, but you don't expect much from a rear brake on a bike, do you? One of the other things that I noticed on this bike is that the clutch action is considerably lighter than the 2018 model. One of the things people notice when they ride my bike is the clutch is particularly stiff. I'm pretty much used to it now. It doesn't really bother me at all. I don't notice it, but it is quite a bit lighter on this bike. So that's a quick walk around the bike. Let's take it for a ride now, shall we? And I'll give you my thoughts on how it rides.
So what's it like to ride? Well, first thing I noticed when I put my leg over the bike was that the seat's a little bit higher to get your leg over. But having said that, once you sat on the bike, I feel like my knees are just a little bit higher up than they are on the previous model XR. Not uncomfortable by any stretch of the imagination, a really comfy bike to sit on. Thank you. But I have to say the seat isn't as comfy as the previous model XR. Now I understand there is a softer seat option, so it's a very middle-aged thing to say that, isn't it? It needs a softer seat on it. I'm only talking marginally, and actually the more I ride it, the more my bum seems to mould itself to that seat, and it feels quite comfortable. But overall it's a really comfortable place to sit. One of the things that people really like about the XR is it's got sports bike performance, but a nice upright riding position. So at low speeds, the low speed handling is really nice. It's really easy to potter around on at low speeds, at town speeds, filtering through traffic. It's a lovely easy bike to ride, and the fueling, I know people mention fueling on bikes. The fueling is really nice and smooth at those low speeds. The bike doesn't shunt. Picks up those low revs really nice and smoothly. Now, engine performance. You know, on paper this is almost identical performance to the previous model XR. This bike has 162 brake horsepower. I think it's pretty much exactly what the previous bike had. But I have to say, it does deliver that power in a slightly different way. I think the overall impression I'm getting of this bike, compared with the previous XR, is definitely evolution rather than revolution. It's not a significantly different bike, but it feels like a more mature version. It feels a little bit less hooligan, a little bit more grown up. Now only a little bit, it can still be a real hooligan if you want it to, this bike, but it does feel a little bit more grown up. And one of the elements in which it feels a bit more grown up is the exhaust note. So I've got it in dynamic at the moment. If I have my XR in dynamic, when you roll off the gas, the exhaust pops and bangs. It's It's not antisocial, but it certainly lets you know that it's there. If you put it in road mode, it's a little bit more subdued, but in dynamic mode it pops and bangs when you roll off the gas. It's got quite a loud, raucous exhaust note. This is the standard exhaust, I haven't changed it. This bike in dynamic mode, so when I roll off the gas, there's no popping and banging from the exhaust. It's a bit more mature. Now it's Euro 5 compliant. I suspect it's partially to do with the changes that they've made to the exhaust before it gets to the muffler at the rear. There's quite a hefty chunk of stainless steel exhaust and filters and catalytic converters and all sorts underneath this bike to get it compliant with emissions legislation. But it's taken a little bit of an edge off that exhaust note. Now it doesn't particularly bother me. I quite like that sort of mature element to the bike. I am a gentleman in my 50s now, you know, and no doubt BMW and other manufacturers will be making sports exhaust if you want it to be a little bit louder as well. But along with that slightly subdued exhaust note is just a generally slightly subdued engine response compared with the previous bike. And actually what I think they've done is they've just played around with the engine mapping, played around with the fueling a little bit just to smooth it out. And it's actually, when you wind it on, it's no less urgent at all than the previous model. I think the fueling map, certainly up to 6,000 revs, just feels a little bit more linear. It feels like it's giving you a nice, smooth, calm engine and throttle response throughout that rev range. The gearbox is 6-speed, just like the last bike. Unlike the last bike, what they've done is lengthen the ratios in 5th and 6th gear. So when you're cruising motorway speeds, the engine is a little bit less frantic. It's running at slightly lower revs. BMW say that gives us better fuel economy. My view on fuel economy is when the fuel gauge gets low, I just stop and put some more in, so I'm not particularly bothered about fuel economy, but it is a little bit less buzzy on motorways in 6th gear. This bike is the TE spec, so it's fitted with BMW's Gear Shift Assist Pro, which is their quick shifter system. So it's clutchless gear changes up and down the gearbox once you've moved away from stationary. First thing I've noticed on this bike is it's a bit clunky. It's certainly clunkier than it is on my 2018 bike, but I suspect, and I'm going to put that down to the fact that this bike isn't properly running yet, but I'm using this gearbox in exactly the same way I do in mine. You need a little bit of gas on to change up, and it needs to be fully off the gas to change down, and the bike rev matches nicely. But it is a little bit clunky on this bike. Now that little bit of clunkiness that I'm putting down to the bike not being running properly yet, it is worse at low speeds. Once you pick your speed up on the bike, it smooths out. And it may well be that the chain just needs a slight adjust on this bike. I know when my gearbox starts getting a bit clunky, I'll just adjust the chain, take a little bit of the slack out of the chain, and give it a good lube up, and it usually smooths the gear change out. But on the whole, it's a really nice gearbox to use, nice and easy, very straightforward, up and down the box. Barely have to think about it really. So how does it handle? Well, first things first, I'm not going to thrash this bike to death. 3 good reasons. It's not mine. The tyres aren't properly scrubbed in yet, as I found out on a roundabout a little bit early on when the front started to wash wide a little bit. Bit of understeer on a bike, it's not what you want. That's just down to the tyres not being quite bedded in properly. And the bike itself isn't running properly as well. You know, they have a running in service at 600 miles, so I'm conscious that it's not had that yet. But first impressions are pretty good. Brakes are super sharp, especially on the front. That quick shifter makes it very easy just to tap it down into whatever gear you need for the corner. The flexibility of the engine really helps pull the bike through the corner. So even down into first gear for a nice sharp hairpin like this, very easy. So I would describe the handling as extremely similar to the previous model. I've not noticed any significant differences with this. In the more open, wide corners, really, it's just a little movement of your shoulders just to tip the bike in. Tighter corners, if you use a counter steer technique, just push the inside bar away from you very briefly to get the bike to tip in. It's really eager to tip in the corner. This bike's running on Bridgestone Battle Axe tyres, which are okay, a sports touring tyre. I prefer Michelin Road 5s, not sure if that's an option on these if you order them from new, I'll ask when I get to the dealers. Ride quality is really good on the bike, I have to say. It's a softer setup than the previous XR, and I'm starting to notice that now on these jiggly little back roads up around Rivington. It's actually quite a supple bike to ride. I would say it's significantly suppler than the previous XR. Anybody worried about the old reputation that the early XRs had for having very buzzy bars, you don't need to worry with this bike. There's no buzz coming through these bars at all. Nice and relaxed on the hands. Having said that, mine's a 2018 model, that doesn't suffer from the buzz through the bars either, so it's never been an issue for me on the XR. This TFT screen, I haven't really got a lot of time to faff about with it too much, but on the face of it, it seems really good. Lovely clear screen, clear instrumentation, everything there that I need to know. Apparently you can link it into your mobile phone, you can get sat-nav directions through your mobile phone onto this. This TE spec bike is wired up for the sat-nav as well, for BMW's Navigator 5. But I think if you could just get sat-nav directions through this TFT screen, why would you bother with the sat-nav? I'm not sure. But I've only just jumped on the bike, I'm not familiar with this with the screen setup, and honestly I've got used to it pretty much instantly. So there, for instance, in first gear in dynamic on my bike, if I roll off the gas it'll give a big loud bang and pop. This bike's much more civilised. Well, you notice there, it just missed going from first to second. That's an issue I have with mine. I tend to clutch it through first to second because you're going through neutral. That Gear Shift Assist Pro occasionally just doesn't quite get it all the way through neutral. It's probably me being a bit limp ankled on the gear change. Very tractable in the lower gears, but actually at 30 miles an hour, if I tip it up into 6 now, still plenty of torque. It will pull from 6th gear quite nicely, not vigorously but quite nicely. Drop it down to 3rd though at 30 miles an hour. And if you are looking to ride this bike at higher speeds through a series of bends, I think it prefers to be in the lower gears. It's not like a GS where you just stick it in a high gear and rely on that big wave of torque. And I've been riding it on and off for a couple of hours now, and actually the bike has shrunk underneath me. Stand next to it, it's quite a big piece of kit. Once you're on it and rolling along at these sort of low to medium speeds, the bike shrinks underneath you. So let's just take the bike on a little bit of a national speed limit road. You've probably seen this road a few times before. So we got those revs round. Yeah, it definitely still got that sport bike feel to it. Loads of urgency in those lower gears. Keep it in 2nd and 3rd on a road like this. Yeah, it really wants to go. Like I said before, I'm not pushing this bike too much. It's not mine, it's not running. Tyres aren't properly scrubbed in yet, but even so, it's still a really exciting thing to ride. Starting to lean on those brakes just a little bit more into some of these tighter corners. Line the gas on. the bike is suddenly up on its toes. You can feel it hitching its skirt up, getting up on its toes. But still, I'm not having to tuck myself down behind the screen. I don't feel like I need to shift my weight around on the seat. The bike handles really nicely with this comfortable upright riding position. I inadvertently hit the red limit at any second. And once again, just like the old model, it's got that Jekyll and Hyde character. Bring it back down to sort of 30 mile an hour through the villages like this, and it's a pussycat. But it really reveals its other character once you get the revs around in the lower gears. So second gear now, 30 miles an hour. Oh yeah. Like a stabbed rat. So I need to get this bike back to the dealers for 4 o'clock. We're going to have to jump on the motorway, so let's put the screen up into the higher position. I can't tell you how good that is. A simple addition. Come on, surely somebody aftermarket can make something like this for the previous Model XR. It's not a massively high screen. My head is still in the airflow at the moment. But I'm only average height, really, 6 foot. I've got quite a long back, so my head sort of pops up above that screen a little bit. Always a debate for me on my XR as to whether the screen is better in the lower position or the higher position. It tends to be in slightly more turbulent air when it's up in the higher position, but a little bit less gusty, whereas in the lower position I think it's deflecting the air probably a little bit higher over my head, but you know, it's a little bit noisier. Wind noise is a little bit higher, so never quite find the sweet spot. Oh, talking of sweet spots, this bike has 3 settings for the heated grips. So finally there's a Goldilocks setting on the heated grips. So on mine they're either tepid or incinerator levels. This one's got a bit of a Goldilocks setting, which is nice. So let's join the M61 towards Manchester, see what this is like at a cruise on the motorway. So cruising just over 70 there is under 4,500 revs, so that is a little bit higher geared in top gear. Makes for an easier cruise. So is it comfortable on the motorway cruise? Yeah, absolutely. I was pretty comfy there. A bit further to go yet, but we'll stick a bit of petrol in. So some final thoughts on the 2020 S1000 XR. I suppose I'm always going to draw the comparison with my bike with the 2018, 2019 XR. And I have to say this is not a significantly different bike. The differences to me are it feels a little bit more mature, a bit more grown up, and it's whether you want that out of a bike or not makes it whether it's worth changing. So yeah, there's some slightly better technology on it. It's got the TFT screen, which is nice, much more information on the dashboard. A few little additions like the extra setting on the heated grips, the little screen adjuster, which I absolutely love. The gearing's slightly different, so it's not quite as frantic at motorway speeds, but when you get on it on this bike it is just as quick as the previous one. No quicker, just as quick. It's slightly softer, it just feels a bit more grown up. If you'd not ridden an XR before and you got on this, you know, you'd realise that this is a very, very quick bike, very capable. But just compared with the 18 bike and the 19 bike, a bit more mature, a bit more grown up. Is it worth swapping? I don't think it's worth swapping from mine to this for the sake of just changing the bike. And I'm going to have to change the bike at some point. It's on a PCP deal, but I can't say I'm itching to change it early or come out of that deal early and pay the extra money that involves to get on this 2020 bike. It's a really good, competent bike this, but so's the older one. You look at the changes that BMW have made to this 2020 model. You know, new frame, the more up-to-date RR engine, the gear in the tech, the suspension. I think I was perhaps expecting it to be a little bit more different to ride, but it really isn't. So if, like me, you part your way through a PCP or finance deal, I'm not convinced it's worth chopping it in at the moment. But having said that, once I come to the end of that deal, I think I will definitely be looking at one of these. That's probably in another couple of years' time. Well, here she is, freshly serviced. Ready to play. So jumping straight back on this, very noticeable that seat, it's a bit comfier on this one, a little bit softer. The back overall is a little bit firmer. There's that exhaust note I was talking about.